Hello again. Sorry, there's been a little bit of a break in the videos. We had a good time in Utah for the wedding for my daughter, and sadly I didn't get any footage. I had actually planned on getting some uh, footage of the setup, teardown, dancing, things like that, but um, apparently somehow the GoPros turned themselves on at some point during the trip, or the power button got pushed anyway, and they were both dead when we tried to start setting things up. And it would appear that the power cords were also forgotten and left in Washington. And we were in the middle of setting things up for the wedding, and I didn't want to take the time to go to a local store to pay, $10 for a cable or two. So anyway, we didn't get any footage, but we did get some. We had Marilyn, my ex-wife, was the photographer, and she did an amazing job, and we got a lot of photos from that. So we'll put together a little bit of a video in the not too distant future about that, and we'll get that posted after I get permissions from everybody in the photos and from the photographer to actually share that video. So for now, we're going back to earlier in the month when I'm working on trying to build the speakers and get them finished up. And what you saw here is just the little holes for these Neutrik pole mount connectors, or box mount connectors, are just a little bit too small for the screws that actually fit through them. And these are the smallest screws I could, or little smallest machine bolts I could find. I ended up dropping one of the nuts, and luckily it got caught in one of the folds of the pant leg, so I found that one. I ended up dropping another one and was not able to find it. We ended up just having to go buy another one, but they're kind of annoying with how small they are. It's a little bit of a frustration to work on them. But I'm basically doing like as much of an assembly line as I can. So I'm trying to get all of one step done, and then all of the next step, and all of the next step. That way I can make sure that everything is complete and I don't miss anything. The advantage to that is it actually speeds things up. Helps make certain that everything is done as close to the same as possible. And yeah, see here, I'm trying to see if I can find that last nut. I ended up just putting it together as much as I could, and knowing that we'd have to go get another nut. But anyway, so now that I've got all of these put together, I can start working on the wiring. And since these are such short runs, I decided to have differentiated cables. I could either go buy a bunch of cable, or I could take advantage of the fact that I have a bunch of cable from previous setups. And that's why I've got a little spool of the white cables over there. I was going to start working on some custom mic cables that I was figuring I'd work on, but I decided against that because they weren't required to actually get the system running. So what I'm doing here is taking the ends of two of those cables And again, some of this is being done. We had an event for our ward that I had volunteered to provide light and sound, and there's a little bit of a time crunch. So I'm trying to rush to get things ready and in place, and I had a box that I used to use so that we could plug using banana connectors, which I don't know why they're called banana plugs. That's just weird. They don't look like bananas at all. They don't function like bananas at all. I don't know. Anyway, they're basically binding post connectors. Anyway, I had a setup where I could plug those in, and as long as you plugged them into the amplifiers correctly, which was color-coded, then you could simply plug all of your wiring in, and as long as you ran an equal number of speakers on each channel and on each side of the room to each plug, then you can't screw them up, which is great because you just plug one speaker into the next, it hooks them all up in parallel, and everything just works. So I was making a little modified version of that to at least get me through this church event. And now I'm gonna build my first box so that I can just kind of figure everything out, make sure the cable connections are all, the wires are all the right length and things like that. And this is, I don't know, this is like, it's that stressful point where you're working on everything, and then it's also a great point to be, because now everything is actually coming together. The downside to that is, the stress of if you screw up, because you can't really test things until you finish and get it all connected. Luckily, it's pretty straightforward. I did run into a severe challenge, actually. As I was starting out with soldering, I kept getting cold solder joints. I kept getting broken solder joints. The solder wouldn't melt properly, and I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out what was going on. And I thought maybe it was because it was too cold out here, but I've soldered in near freezing weather before on vehicles and things, and never had that much of a challenge. So I ended up just having to try. Luckily, I had a different soldering iron, and I thought, well, let me just try the other one from our we've got a soldering iron in our stained glass kit, since you have to use a iron to melt the lead for the stained glass. But I ended up testing that one so I could see if it was maybe the power supply, maybe because I am going through quite a bit of cable to get into this room. I've got about 250 feet from the power source from the circuit breaker box to the camper, and then I've got another 40 feet of cable or so going from the camper's outlet up here into the spare room, and then to allow switching that from, because we use that same cable for our washer and dryer. I've got another extension cord that goes actually into the spare room, and so I thought maybe that was potentially the problem. But it turned out to be that it was just my little soldering iron / wood burning tool is apparently just old and worn out. It just didn't want to work. It didn't want to heat up, and it's always taken a long time to heat up. But I was kind of blown away after I switched things over. The soldering iron for the stained glass setup was hot in like 3 seconds, which blew my mind. I've actually never realized how quickly that one gets hot. But it also is nice because you have a temperature control on it, so you can adjust that if you're melting too quickly or not quickly enough. You can adjust that on the iron, and it's a pretty cool little iron. But once I figured that out, things went really smoothly. So what I'm doing at the moment, though, is this is how I get everything set up. So you'll notice here there's the cables coming from one of the connectors, one of the Neutrik speak-on connectors, to the other one, and then some of the cables come out. And so the two connectors in each box are actually hardwired together, and then the last so for instance, you can see at the bottom there the red and the black wires are coming off, and they're going to eventually be wired together to form a Y, so it goes from connector to connector and from that into the speaker. And then the green and white wires are going only from connector to connector. So when you plug in a cable, it has both the full range and the sub channels on it, but only the sub frequencies can go to a sub box, and only the full range frequencies can go to a full range box because they're wired that way. So the sub connectors will be wired the opposite. The black and the red will go just from connector to connector, and the green and the white will come additionally in to the sub speaker. And so here I'm just stripping the shielding from these old wires, and the reason I'm not using them anymore is because they were smaller wires than they technically should be. So here I'm just taking some of the wires and just double checking to figure out how long I actually need them to go from the dish to the speaker, with enough room that I can solder them in place with the speaker on upside down on top of the face. And then once that's done, I can move on. That was all the footage I got for today, though, but I did get a picture here, so you can kind of see the finished setup. If you look in the larger 12-inch baffle hole, you can see there's the dish with the wires coming off. You can see they actually come up, and I ended up using some wire nuts to hold everything together, in addition to soldering. And then that will go into the PCB for the crossover, and then you've got 3 different wires coming off of the crossover, one for the horn, one for the mid woofer, and one for the woofer. And then there's a bunch of extra wires here in addition to that, because once I got it all figured out and knew that the lengths were right, I grouped everything together and taped everything so that I could easily see exactly what needs to be done, because the wiring is a little bit complicated since I'm using an attenuator. The ground goes from the PCB to the attenuator, then to the device, whether it's the horn or the woofer, and then the positive goes and breaks at the attenuator. I did run into a small problem where the top hat was a little bit too close, so when I put the speakers in to test them, I discovered that the frame for the speaker actually hit the top hat. So I had to adjust that, which left me with some holes that I needed to fill. And at the moment, the easiest solution I could think of was to take some 5-minute epoxy and some sawdust and just mix the two together to create a filler to fill those holes. It was not the most pleasant smelling thing, because it's epoxy, and epoxy stinks. It also wasn't the prettiest looking thing, but it did work. In retrospect, I thought, after I got it all done, I thought, man, I should have just gone and bought a dowel, or made a dowel, and just stuck it in there, glued it in. That would have been a much better solution, and I'm probably going to do that in the future. But here's the final result. It is definitely not the prettiest thing, because it was rather awkward trying to spread that in there, especially when you're on a little bit of a time crunch, because you don't want to let it set up before you can get it into place. But I just smashed a bunch down into each hole, and then being on the inside of the box, it doesn't really matter if it looks smooth, to be honest. But like I said, I think when I open these back up, I had a hard time finding T-nuts locally, so I'm going to have to open these up to replace all of the bolts and screws with T-nuts and bolts, the nuts and washers. So when I do that, I'll probably re-drill those holes to get the epoxy out, because I know it's not filling that hole all the way through, and then I'll use some dowel to actually fill those and get them properly sealed. But they did sound pretty, they sounded amazing, and I didn't hear any whistling or rattling from air leaking through those holes, so they did seal sufficiently. But here's the full range speakers. The only thing left is to put the grill cover over the little 4-inch woofer, and the only reason I don't have that in this picture is because I didn't think about the fact that the way I ended up building that box was attaching the face of the 4-inch to the back of the face of the 12-inch, so that ended up being 1.5 inches thick, and the bolts that came with the little grill clamps are not long enough to go all the way through that. So I had to just go buy some bolts to finish that up. The other challenge that we ran into was the carpet. We ran out of carpet because the subs were actually added later. They weren't originally planned on being done at this point. So I had enough carpet I was able to piece things together well enough that I got all of the outside of like the top, bottom, left, right, and back of the subs, but not the face. So we had to wait for carpet to come, and that was quite the frustration and challenge. Both Home Depot and FedEx dropped the ball and screwed up several times, so what was supposed to be here with like a week and a half before we had to leave for Utah, we didn't actually get until the day we left for Utah. So that's where we were at, and where I ended up getting to for this video. So as always, thank you for watching. God bless you and yours, and stay safe and healthy out there.